chapter 24, Mishnah Bet. 24th chapter, second Mishnah. Yeah. Mishnah zo, בא ללמד, this Mishnah comes to teach us, כיצד נוהגים בהכנת אוכל לבהמה בשבת? How do we have to prepare food for an animal on Shabbat? Are we allowed to make any kind of preparation for an animal when it comes to its food or not? So let's see. מתירים פקיעי אמיר לפני בהמה. You're allowed to untie bundles of hay in front of an animal. אגודות קש של שיבולים. This is bundles of hay, או של טילטן, or of another food for an animal. Not quite sure what tiltan is in English.
It says corn or
fenugreek. מותר להתירן לפני הבהמה בשבת. You're allowed to untie them in front of the animal on Shabbat. So it says,
the animal is important?
Yeah. It says why you're going to see soon. Because if you remember, there are rules of what wood and hay is. Wood and hay is designated usually for burning. So over here, even though it's usually designated for burning, you're still allowed to use it for food. That's the idea. Yeah. שכל זמן שהאמיר קשור, it says the problem is that the entire time this hay is in bundles, אינו נקרא אוכל, it's not called food. שאינו ראוי לאכילה, because an animal doesn't eat the hay bundle. You need to untie it for it. הילקח מותר להתירו כדי לעשות אוכל לבהמה. So therefore, even though until now it was a hay stack, it was a hay bundle, in other words, it had other uses. It wasn't a use for eating, for the animal to eat. You're allowed to prepare it, even though it was used. Until now, you were thinking of using it to build your wall with it. You know, like in the old time, they used to build out of hay. Like over here, the houses, Moshe's house is built out of hay. The same thing, that's what you were planning to. But you're allowed to untie it in order to feed the animals, because that was also a use. A secondary use, but still a use. So you're allowed to untie it in order to make it food for the animal. ומפספסים את הכיפים. And you're allowed to, in your fingers, separate the kipin. What's kipin? היינו ענפים לחים של ארז. This is wet branches of cedar wood. ומותר לפספסם אותם בשבת, היינו לפרקם ולפזרם, in order to make them more malleable. לפני הבהמה, in front of the animal, שרק בדרך זה נועשים אמרי למחרה, because this is the only way that the animals eat them. אבל לא את הזירים. But you're not allowed to untie the zirin. What's zirin? אגודות קש, this is bundles of hay, שנאגדו בשלושה קשרים, that you tie them real good, in 3 knots. The fact that it's tied in 3 knots shows that it is not designated for animal feed. It's designated for other use. אין מפספסים אותם בשבת לפני הבהמה, them you do not untie in front of the animal on Shabbat, שאף על פי שעל ידי ריבוי הקשרים מודקים הם ביותר, because even though because of the many knots they're very tight, מכל מקום די התרתם לעשותם אוכל לבהמה. It says you don't have to make it malleable. In other words, when it comes to hay, you're not allowed to soften it with your hand, because the animals will eat the hay even without it being malleable. In other words, the only food you're allowed to make malleable is if the animal wouldn't eat it. But if the animal would eat it just by untying it, just untie it and don't. It has nothing to do with what I said, with more knots. וכל שהן פקיעי אמיר שאינם מאוגדים אלא בשני קשרים ואינם מודקים כל כך. And how much more so bundles of amir, again a type of hay, that are only with 2 knots and they're not so tight together. שאסור לפספסם בשבת, you're not allowed to make it, separate them on Shabbat. לפי שהתרתם בלבד עושה אותם ראויים לאכילה באמה. Because just by untying them, the animal can already eat them. ואפשר לעשות, ואסור לעשות, לטרוח טרחה יתרה בשבת. In other words, if the animal will eat it as it is, even though it might eat it better in another way, you just do the minimum that the animal will eat, not more work. Next. אין מרסקים בשבת, you do not crush on Shabbat. לא את השחת, not the שחת. שחת is תבואה שלא נגמר בישולה, it's wheat that wasn't completely ripened. ועושים אותם מספול הבהמה, and to make it food for the animal. ולא את החרובין, and you do not take קרב and crush it. כגון החרובים, מלאכים ורקים, for example, that they're soft, still and wet, לפני בהמה, שיהיו יפים לה לאכילה, so it will eat it better. בין דקה בין גסה, whether it was a cow, whether it was a sheep, because a cow eats rougher food, a sheep eats less rough food, בין לפני בהמה דקה, בין לפני בהמה גסה, שטרחה שלא לצורך, again, the animal will eat it the way it is, you don't have to make it smoother for it. רבי יהודה מתיר בחרובים לדקה, רבי יהודה permits, when it comes to carobs, to a sheep, רבי יהודה סובר שמותר לרסק חרובים לפני בהמה דקה בשבת. He says that you're allowed to crush carobs in front of sheep on Shabbat. Why? לפי ששני הדקות, it's got soft teeth, ואינה יכולה לאכול את החרובים. It won't be able to eat the carobs, אלא אם כן מרוסקים הם. Only if they are crushed. But the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, that we say that a sheep is going to eat carob even though it is hard for it to eat. ביארנו את המשנה לפי פירושו של רב יהודה בגמרא. We explained this Mishnah according to the explanation of Rav Yehuda in the Gemara, שכן פירשוה רוב המפרשים. This is the way most of the commentaries explained it. אבל רב הונא מפרש משתנו בדרך אחרת. רב הונא explains this Mishnah in another manner. מתירים פקיעי המיר לפני הבהמה ומפספסים. He says, you are allowed to untie hay in front of an animal and מפספסים, and you're allowed to smoothen it in your hand. כלומר שמותר אף לפספס אותם בשבת. says you even allowed to crush them a little in your hands. כדי שיהיו רואים ונוחים יותר לאכילת הבהמה. In order so that the animal will eat it in a better manner. שכן מותר בשבת לטרוח באוכל אפילו טרחה יתרה. It says when it comes to preparation food, whether it is for humans, whether it is for animals, you're allowed to prepare food with extra work on Shabbat. And it says, וכן את הכיפין, and then the same thing you do with the כיפין. היינו פקיעים המאוגדים בשלושה קשרים. This is if they are hazed, bundled in 3 knots, מתירים ומפספסים אותם בשבת. You're allowed to untie them and you're allowed to crush them in your hand on Shabbat. אבל לא את הזירים, but you're not allowed to do the זירים. ענפי ארז לחים, that they are wet kinds of branches, שאסור לפספסם ואף לא להתירם. It says when it comes to that, you're not allowed to untie them, nor are you allowed to crush them. לפי שסתמם אינם אוכל לבהמה. It says the difference is, hay, a secondary use for hay is always food. It says branches, it's not even considered a secondary food. It's set up for something else. It's not set up for secondary food. What is it set up for? שכן רוב בני אדם מניחים אותם לשבת, because the majority of people don't set it up as a secondary food for the animals. They set it up as wood, as burning material. ודבר שאין תחילתו אוכל, and something that is not even secondary as food, אסור לתקנו ולעשות אוכל בשבת. You're not to make it into food on Shabbat. עיין בגמרא, it says, look in the Gemara, שמקשים על רב הונא מהספר של משנתנו. They have a question on רב הונא from the end of the Mishnah. So the argument is branches itself is considered to be food or not. Rav Huna says it is not considered food at all, and our Mishnah, the way we learned in the beginning, considers it as food. Okay, next one. Bi'ur Mishnah Gimel.
So if the animal's going to eat it, even if it would be better for the animal if you separate it, it's still saying.
According to Rav Huna, it's not food.
No, but even the regular food, the three knots.
So it says there's a difference between hay
And cedar.
and cedar. Yeah, one of them is going to eat it without, and the other one is not going to eat it without. That's the
But even
difference.
with that, a guy that says, I want to be nice to my sheep and I want to separate the hay also.
You're not allowed to,
Okay.
according to the one opinion. Because it's going to eat it anyway, that's right. And the other opinion says no. If it's food, you're allowed to do with food just like for you, you're allowed to do whatever. Then you're also for the animal, you're allowed to do for whatever.
Yeah.
So we have altogether like 3 opinions, not just 2.